Well, welcome on the cusp of what's going to feel like spring pretty soon, I hope. Good afternoon. My name is Tom Landy. I'm the director of the McFarland Center for Religion, Ethics, and Culture at the College of the Holy Cross. For those who don't know, the McFarland Center sponsors and supports lectures and discussions, usually in Ream Library live, but this year virtually, that explore basic questions of meaning, morality, and mutual obligation. Being virtual has given us the opportunity to reach out to our more extended Holy Cross community. And I'd like to especially welcome students and their families. They're on the call, I hope on the Zoom today. New members of the class of 2025 have been invited. Families joining us for Family Week. I'd also like to welcome and thank our alumni who've been really generous with their time and willingness to engage with our students. Today's conversation is sponsored with the Chioka Center for Business, Ethics, and Society, Holy Cross, and I'm grateful to Professor Kendi Hess for her support in organizing it. I'm pleased really today to be joined by and welcoming two remarkable alumni. They're attorneys, they're corporate leaders, Damon Hart of the class of 96 and Dominic Blue of the class of 98 for a discussion on investing in racial equity. Since last summer, after the protests and activism triggered by the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others, the McFarland Center has been engaging our alumni in conversations about the structural racism that undergirds the injustice of these acts, the ways that our alumni are working to dismantle it, and how our students might work to do the same. We've hosted discussions with Malik Neal of the class of 2013, who's heading the Philly Bail Fund on ending cash bail, with Rashonda Tyson of the class of 2004 on improving educational opportunities for Black and Brown students, with Jerry Dickinson of the class of 09, an attorney and a law professor at Pitt now, on fair and inclusive housing practices, and last month with Ron Lawson of the class of 75 on addressing the homelessness crisis in New York City. You can find video of all those talks on our website. And today's discussion is also being recorded and will be posted online in a day or two. Everyone here, I hope, has been genuinely horrified by depressing examples of the most egregious forms of racism, of killings, of threats, demeaning encounters that recur and have necessitated the responses like Black Lives Matter. Those forms of racism obviously warrant our attention and our energy. At the same time, we know that many of the factors that profoundly impact Black and Brown people's life chances are maybe slower, less explicit, maybe bureaucratic, hard to pin down, certainly pernicious though. In the academy and elsewhere, we often describe those factors as structural racism. Structural racism refers to a whole array of norms, policies, social priorities that are racially biased in far less obvious ways than are visible in a hate crime. They could be biased in deliberate but subtle ways, or inherited bias unthinkingly as neutral as the way things are, and invested with seemingly plausible deniability. But ultimately, they bias benefits towards people with racial privilege and away from people without it. The effect of it is clear. The intention may be harder to prove, but we're paying a lot more attention to it now. And our speakers are going to help us understand how that's happening in the workplace as well. Damon and Dominic are members of a coalition of Black and Brown executives from Massachusetts' leading corporations who recently helped to form the new Commonwealth Racial Equity and Social Justice Fund to support Black and Brown communities in Boston and across Massachusetts. The fund provides resources to nonprofits to dismantle systemic racism in areas including healthcare, policing, criminal justice, economic empowerment, youth education, and civic engagement. They'll talk a bit more about that today, and I'm eager to hear more. Damon Hart is Executive Vice President and Deputy Chief Legal Officer, soon to become the Chief Legal Officer at Liberty Mutual Insurance. Previously, he served as the company's Chief Employment and Benefits Counsel for its 55,000 employees worldwide. Before joining Liberty Mutual, Damon was a partner at 3 national law firms, Littler Mendelson, Ogletree Deakins, and Holland and Knight. He has strong experience in a variety of complex business disputes on matters arising out of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Fair Labor Standards Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, and other state, local, federal anti-discrimination and employment statutes. While at Holy Cross, Damon was a political science major and starting forward on the basketball team, which appeared in the 1993 NCAA tournament. He's a graduate of Boston College Law School, active in his community as a sports coach and a mentor. He serves on the board of directors for the Home for Little Wanderers. Dominic Blue is head of MassMutual Strategic Distributors. Previously, he was Chief Transformation Officer for a major business line at MassMutual, and prior was Senior Vice President and Deputy Counsel in MassMutual's Law Department. Dominic has experience with the international law firm Edwards, Angle, Palmer, and Dodge, and with the corporate law group Tessa, Hurwitz, and Thibault in Boston. Dominic was a sociology major at Holy Cross and co-captain of the varsity football team. He too earned his law degree from Boston College Law School, as well as an MBA from the Carroll School of Management at Boston College. He served on the board of directors of various committees of the Massachusetts Department of Transportation and the board of directors and finance committee for the Greater Springfield YMCA. He was president of the Massachusetts Black Lawyers Association and a former panel member of the appeals board of the Supplier Diversity Office of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We're going to talk with both of them for a little bit on the topics I've mentioned. And then following that, we've invited three current Holy Cross students: Matthew Cedeno, who's in the class of 22, Holly Tenti, who's in the class of 23, and Nalani Ramos Ruiz of the class of 21. All three are engaged in the Chioka Center's programs on entrepreneurial studies, and they're going to bring questions that they have brought and questions from you to Damon and Dominic. You can submit those questions at any time in the program using the Q&A function. We have a great turnout today. I'm really pleased about that. And the event is also being broadcast, I should mention, on Worcester's Unity Radio. So welcome, Damon and Dominic.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
So maybe the place to start is thinking about the workplace. It's interesting that some of the events that we've had so far have been about more in the social service area, some of the places that people think about as particularly impacting the lives of Black and Brown people. You've been working in the corporate sector, you know the law well, and I'm sure some of our students of color and other students who are thinking about the corporate sector are probably wondering, what's that like? How are people welcome? What does the corporate sector do to prevent that? Maybe you can talk a little bit about your experiences there and what that world is like.
Sure. If you don't mind, I'll just go first. I like the context that you set forth. And first of all, it's a pleasure to be back at Holy Cross, even though virtually. Had a great experience there. Dominic and I have been friends for the past 25 years that we started in the basement of Loyola. And it's just a pleasure to see us now in this role, really representing two of Massachusetts' most premier companies in MassMutual and Liberty Mutual. So it's a real pleasure to be here. But I think about, it's a striking kind of lack of progress when you think about structural racism. And I love the way you put it, Tom, in that there are individual acts, hate crimes, things like that, that you can easily say, well, that's a bad actor, that's a bad apple type of justification. When you look at kind of where have Black people come in this country, it is a striking lack of progress. Home ownership. In 1976, 44% of Black homes, Black folks own their own home. In 2015, that number is 43%. So we've gone down. Median household income in 2007, it was 40,000. 2017, 40,000. We haven't made much progress while other ethnic groups have made more. Unemployment, always significantly higher than the general population. There are studies, Black and Brown people are 30% less likely to get a call back for an interview. Incarceration, Black people make up 12% of the population, but 33% of incarcerated people. 1954, we had Brown versus Board of Education, desegregating the schools. Currently, today's schools are more segregated than they were in 1954. We had 2 Black women this year become CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. That raised the number to 5 total Black CEOs. Think about if we were at our population on parity with our population level of about 12.9%, we would have 65 Black CEOs. There's been 19 Black CEOs in the history of the Fortune 500, dating back to 1955. So I say all that to say there's a lot of work to do, and there is a lot of structural racism. That's the only way you can account for these statistics. I know Dominic, like myself, I've always worked really hard at with kind of within the system to advance diversity through mentoring and speaking the truth to power and creating programs to reach down and develop people and bring them along, but also in leading Black organizations. Dominic was head of the Mass Black Lawyers. I was in that role as well prior to him. And so it's a multi-pronged approach of lifting as we climb, working internally as well as externally in the community, and trying to have an impact within this structure and within this system. I'll talk a little bit more about the fund in a minute, but I'll just create some space for Dominic to give his thoughts. I mean, I do feel like it's a bit of a responsibility. I don't look at it as optional in terms of what I do to advance the plight of people of color within business. I feel like it's a responsibility. Is it fair that in addition to all I have to do as an executive and soon to be chief legal officer, I have to do all these other things? I don't think it's necessarily fair, but I'll take that on. I've been given tremendous opportunities, not the least of which is getting a chance to go to Holy Cross and get that wonderful Jesuit education. So I feel like it's up to us who's been given a lot to pay it forward.
And I think what you asked about was kind of corporate America. And I think historically, corporate America has really struggled with racial equality and their role with racial equality. I think it came in various different forms, right? So when I first joined the workforce, I kind of had this concept of affirmative action. And as a result of that, there was this belief that African Americans and others were given opportunities because of the color of their skin and were not deserving. So then we kind of switched terminology. So terminology is really important, and you're going to see this in the progress and history of diversity. And then it's kind of now it's morphed to diversity and inclusion. One of the things I think kind of happened after the murder of George Floyd is that there's been a more open and honest dialogue around the responsibilities of corporate America when it comes to racial equality. And so I think part of that was part of that you see with the launch of the fund. You see other companies talking openly about it. They're have it in their commercials, and they're putting it as part of their corporate responsibility statement. And it's funny because in early 2020, I did a search of corporate responsibility statements. They call it ESG. And if you did a search and you searched under racial equity, I couldn't find one company that had racial equity as part of their ESG statement, as part of their social responsibility in the country. And I think that part of this was because a lot of companies, especially large corporations, probably struggled themselves with retaining Black people, Latinx folks. And so I think that they also kind of struggle with how can we go out there in the community when our own numbers might not kind of reflect the community. But I think the fact that we're able to have an open and honest dialogue now allows us to really make change. So we need to seize this opportunity. I think as Damon mentioned, it's funny that when I look at the 19 people, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, when I talk about the 19 people that form the fund, we all have been very active over the years in racial equity, right? So there's 4 of us that were leaders and presidents of the Massachusetts Black Lawyers Association. That's not by accident. And we've been able to figure out ways in which to be leaders and advance racial equity and still be successful in the business world, right? So that's kind of an area where we all kind of navigated, and we were able to do that. And one thing I'm excited about in working with these 19 people is that we understand that we're standing on the shoulders of giants and a lot of people who fought to open doors for us. And it's our responsibility to make sure we widen that door and allow others to come behind us, right? We want to have a legacy of having many others come behind us. And so look forward to talking with you a little bit more about the fund. But I think that in terms of MassMutual, we have a strategic Black initiative. I think it was Monday, we announced that we formed a fund to provide equity capital to Black-owned businesses in Massachusetts. And Damon just mentioned the fact of the wealth gap. And one of the problems that we face is lack of access to capital. So MassMutual is doing something about that. We're also doing something around retaining and attracting Black and African Americans. And so there is work that's going on, but because of this discussion, we're able to be open and honest about the gaps and then create strategies for closing those gaps.
Hey, Tom, can I just jump in? So
Sure.
I think the other thing, as we're talking about business and we're talking about diversity and inclusion and creating a more inclusive environment and in fact, inviting more people to the table, there's been studies ad nauseum about the benefits of diversity in the corporate space. The more diverse companies just win more often. They have better returns, better results. You can study it on a micro level in terms of look at like the dynamics of a team when there's more diverse voices there. So they've had studies that even the white guys in the room talk more and more freely when there's more diversity there. There's a multiplier impact. And I think, as Dominic said, when we look at this moment that we're in as a country, I think some people's eyes were opened when they saw the horror of George Floyd in that 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And, one of the things I like to think about in terms of, there certainly was a bad acting officer in that interaction, but him sitting there and so casually doing it was the system that empowered him. So there's an example of individual act, heinous, and then his look on his face with his hand in his pocket, totally relaxed, looking dead into the camera as he was snuffing the life out of a man calling for his mother who passed away. That was what struck me as the difference between the system and individual acts.
Well, that helps me. Let me just ask one follow-up question about that, because so much, as you know better than I do, you've studied the law. So many of the gains were based on Civil Rights Act of '64, the voting rights. There were government actions, and we seem to be a bit frozen in terms of moving forward. So there's an argument that some people would put out to say maybe there was a time when the military was taking the lead on integration and helping people of color move forward. What do I say to my colleagues who think I ought to be cynical about the idea that businesses will take the lead in doing that? Certainly, perhaps it's coming out of a zero-sum game mentality. You helped us talk about the possibility that everyone benefiting will work out well for business. Should I really be optimistic? Should I be sort of letting business take the lead on something that that our politics has not taken us to so far?
Yeah. So a couple things. I think that I think it'd be a mistake to say that businesses should take a lead on racial equity. I think everyone needs to play a role. Everyone, government, private sector, nonprofits, business. You mentioned military, right? So yeah, I think you were referring to the integration of the military, and that only got us so far. And I think the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan came after World War I, right? When soldiers returned home from overseas and thinking that they have kind of better opportunities. And so I think everyone has a role to play. I think one of the things that strikes me is the younger generation who are coming into the workforce, whether or not white, Black, Latinx, they have a different expectations than myself or you. I don't think it's no longer kind of tolerated by kind of this new generation to work in an environment that has racial inequities, to allow that sexism, to allow discrimination. I think that their voice is being heard loud and clear, and so I think that the bar has been set at a very, very different level, And so companies are reacting to that because kind of they're trying to attract the best and brightest. They're trying to attract talent. And that's one of the value propositions that companies have now. And so when you take a look at any company website, they promote diversity, right? The pictures on their website are much different now than when I joined the workforce back in the 90s, right? And so it's a very different perception. So do I think that they are going to, do I think that businesses have a role to play? Absolutely. Do I think they're going to play the role? I think that they have to if they want to continue to attract the kind of best and brightest and folks who are graduating from Holy Cross.
So I love this question. And I love what you said, Dominic. I think it's really important to think, and I love that you brought in the history, because I think that if you think about the movement in the 60s, right? It was a moral imperative in terms of this is the right thing to do. That only got us so far, unfortunately. And if you study the history, there's a really good documentary out on Netflix called The Amend, and it really follows the history around the 14th Amendment and looks at, the Emancipation Proclamation. It conferred freedom from slavery, but not citizenship. We needed the 14th Amendment to bring that about, and looks at how that has been used for all the various civil rights movements to push and open that door as far as who can really be full participants in this country and what it has to offer. So I also think about, racism is a creation of economics. It was created first, and then to justify the economic situation of slavery. It's like my favorite author, what's his name? Ta-Nehisi Coates. He says that that racism is the father of race and not the son. And so I love that we're at this moment, and I think we actually do have some power to use economics to help to unwind that. There's a really good book out by a woman named Heather McGee. It just came out last month called The Sum of Us. And I had an opportunity to interview her at Liberty Mutual a couple weeks ago. And that book is all about what's called drained pool politics. And she talks about the example of, in this country, there was this movement to build all these public pools. And then there were court cases that said you had to integrate those pools in the 50s. And rather than integrating, they drained the pool so no one could have it. And that analogy keeps showing up in terms of what we are missing in terms of our GDP and our growth and our innovation and all of these things, and social services and all of that because of racism. And so I think there's a quantifiable thing that is missing from our economy. And that is because of the way things have been set up in terms of race and racism and structural racism. So I think that I'm glad that we're getting to the economic motive, because I think that's the only thing we can use to start to unwind this. And also, working for a big company, we pay attention to the activists who are out there. And some people complain about them. I appreciate that they're out there. And as Dominic said, with this next generation, they're not going to let us just move on to the next thing. And I think that's a good thing. And that gives me some hope that we're actually going to make some real progress. Great.
I know that some of the students will have more questions about the workplace, about moving into it. So maybe the place we could move on to a little bit is about the NCF and the work that you're doing. Can you tell us a little bit about the fund, its history, its impetus, the kind of work that you're doing with it?
Sure. Dom, you want to take the first stab at it and I'll fill in, or you want me to go first?
Sure. And why don't I start off with how the fund came together, because I think that part of it's really important. So I received a text message. I was actually looking on my phone. It was on June 5th, 2020, from someone that both Damon and I know named Damian Wilmot. You got to forgive him. He went to Trinity, but he's still a great person. And so he texted me. He's like, I need to talk with you for a second. Can you give me a call? So I called him, and he was kind of really excited. He said, I have a great idea. I just want to float it by you to see if you'll be interested. I want to launch like a fund or just do something in order to make an impact and for us to get involved and use our positions at our companies, our wealth, and try to figure out how we can eradicate racism. And he didn't need to say anything else. He could have kind of stopped at the first line, because I was like, whatever you got, I'm down. Let's do it. And 3 days later, we had our first board meeting. And so I joined the call. I didn't know actually who else was going to be on that call. And to my surprise, there were 19 Black and brown people, all kind of C-suite executives from across Massachusetts. We have CEOs, we have, one layer down. So folks who are in very, very prominent positions throughout all the major companies in Massachusetts. And it was such a great conversation. Number one, I think that we all kind of shared this the same passion for using our position to try to do something about what's going on. And from there, it kind of just took off. I think we kind of all organized around what do we want to do. And Damon mentioned something. So part of this effort was, why don't we take a step back and understand the scope of the work? What do we need to do and what do we need to accomplish in the fund? And we did a little bit of research, and a couple things that I want to kind of point out. So there was research done by the Boston Globe, and they took a look at 8 major cities across the United States. And in this study, it said 54% of Black people feel that Boston is unwelcoming to people of color, right? Which directly impacts companies in their ability to recruit people within their company. There was also another study that shows that that Black Americans are 2.5 times more likely than white people to be killed by police. There's also a study that showed that Massachusetts was not immune to it. Black people are killed more frequently by police in Massachusetts. There's also racial profiling going on in nearly every police department in Massachusetts. The COVID death rate is 3.6 times for Black people is 3.6 times that for white people. So the list kind of goes on and on. So the scope of this problem was very big, and so we knew that we need to make a big impact. And so we all kind of got together. We formed the fund. We went out there and fundraised, and as part of this effort, we knew that we had to sustain this for a long period of time. And we got commitments not only from our companies, but from people out there, right? So when we put it out there, I got people emailing me just saying, hey, I just contributed money to the fund. We all kind of committed to the fund ourselves. Right now, we have 30 million in committed capital, and we're seeking to raise 100 million to do a few things, as you mentioned before. Is number one is provide financial support to nonprofit organizations that are fighting to dismantle systemic racism. The second thing we're trying to do is provide some thought leadership, and we're also trying to kind of leverage our networks to provide support to these nonprofit organizations. Our research also showed that 2 cents in Boston, only 2 cents out of every philanthropic dollar goes to nonprofits supporting Black and brown communities, right? So these organizations are typically underfunded. Wow. And we thought that, again, we're looking to make an impact here. And so by providing them with the financial resources to make an impact, we think we can really move the needle. So I'll pause there and let kind of Damon add his comments as well.
Yeah, I think you covered a lot of it. I mean, Damien, when the story's told about the NCF, I mean, you got to mention him. It was his brainchild. He got us all together. It's been an amazing experience. Not only, we just came out of Black History Month. I've said it multiple times. We're making Black history by what we're doing with this fund. We're doing things differently. We are looking to change and address the results of systemic racism, but also dismantle it at the same time through changing the narrative and creating this ecosystem of thought and connecting some of the nonprofits that might not know each other, but also, as Dominic said, a very important part is funneling funds to Black and brown run organizations that have had trouble getting funds in the past. and just really having a really authentic conversation about what's going on in the country and in our Commonwealth. All of us being horrified of watching what happened to George Floyd, and frankly thinking about the last time I got pulled over, and they don't come to the window and ask if I'm an SVP or an EVP or anything like that. They just see this big black guy in a car, and unfortunately everybody has had that experience that's in our group, and so we were all kind of forced to really reckon with this and do something more. And we've worked really hard. We've met pretty much every single week since June 5th or 6th last year, multiple times a week, to build this thing and get it off the ground. And the other thing that I'll say is it's been one of the most impactful experiences of my career to just work with these brilliant Black and brown executives on this area that we have passion. We didn't have to get on and like immediately create a hierarchy, because it was just everybody totally in for the cause. And that's been really phenomenal. And I'm just looking forward to where we can go and where we can take this thing.
Thanks. I love the phrase ecosystem of thought that you used. So
Yeah.
I'm interested in a way, and I think about this also with our undergraduates education. There's a way you want to sort of go out and do something and so there's a gathering the funds, and $100 million will be nothing to sneeze at. It's an extraordinary sum of money. But how do you work as a group to build that ecosystem of thought? How, in other words, giving advice. There's certainly been a whole history of problems with nonprofits getting advice from whether it's white corporate suites or wherever that's coming from. So how do you begin to think about what your training, how you can contribute to that, and make that a shared conversation with the people who run these organizations?
Well, I think one of the things we've been thinking about is, first of all, we're brand new. I mean, we're not even a year old, our organization, so we're still building out a lot of our internal structures. But so far, we've really operated on a trust-based philanthropy model, and we did do a bunch of demonstration grants at the end of last year. We gave out $1 million to 50,000 to 20 different organizations across the Commonwealth. And one of the things we're seeing there is that even just being associated with our fund has raised the profile of these organizations. There were a number of articles. The Globe did articles, Brockton newspaper did articles, Springfield did some articles about highlighting the impact of these grants. And so I think it's an ongoing discussion about engaging really deeply with these organizations, and in some ways, we're connecting with them and finding out that they need some expertise that we have on board, but also we're thinking about how do we create resources within our structure that we can kind of lend out to different organizations for a time period to kind of get them to the next level. We're doing a lot of thinking about capacity building. So we find an organization that we align on their mission. They've done some good work. We do our due diligence, and then we kind of engage in a discussion with them about what does it take for you to get to the next level so that you're serving an even broader community or doing what you do better and more efficiently. So those are the kinds of discussions that we're having. I think that the new part for us, the new part for the way that we're operating, is kind of the way that we're sourcing our potential grantees and the level of engagement that we have with them.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, Damon, is I think it's important for us, and one of the things we talk a lot about is meeting the organizations where they're at, right? So we didn't want to come in and acting as though we were expert in what they're doing. They're on the ground day to day, and that's the reason why we selected them for financial support. What we identified is that through this engagement and having the conversations with these organizations, we're able to connect them with additional resources within our network. And to give an example of this, more recently, as part of the Black Strategic Initiative at MassMutual, we planned a Black college tour for an organization in Phoenix. And someone raised whether or not we could do it also in Springfield, where our corporate headquarters is at. And I knew one of the organizations that we gave money to already had that in place. And so rather than MassMutual's kind of creating that wheel again, I connected these two groups so they can expand their existing program, right? So we are able to kind of connect these dots and be an additional resource for these organizations.
Good. I have a whole slew of questions that I could ask, and I know that there's some that came in, but we also asked three great students, Holly Tenti, Matthew Cedeno, and Nalani Ramos Ruiz. They have some questions prepared, and they will moderate some questions for you in the time that we have left. So maybe if Holly and Nalani and Matthew would, I'll let you guys go.
So we actually have received several questions in the chat, and we kind of just wanted to kick things off with one of the questions from our audience in relation to the fund that you both hold leadership positions on. And that is, has the fund met with any local law enforcement to open the dialogue with them yet, or are there plans to do so?
Yeah, I mean, I work on the criminal justice reform. We haven't met with police departments yet, but we did have a lunch and learn with some leading folks in that space. Rachel Rollins was on that panel as well. Rasan Hall was on that panel from the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. So we are starting those discussions. I think that we're currently studying the levers that we can pull and push to have the biggest impact. But that was a really good opening discussion. If you want to find it, you can find it on the New Commonwealth Fund's website. We're going to be posting the videos from these lunch and learns. We did 4 of them in the month of February on each one of our pillars. But so that was a really important discussion to talk about criminal justice reform. And Rachel Rollins, if you've ever heard her speak, quite entertaining and super informative.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. Mr. Hart and Mr. Blue, we just have our next question coming in from our audience, and it is about concerning the companies that fail to actively recruit members of the BIPOC community. And what are your thoughts on how corporations can promote racial equity with their current employees? And how can they be held accountable to follow through on these diversity pledges?
Yeah, that's a great question. Why don't I address the first part of the question about recruiting folks. And so there's a few things I think that that a company needs to do kind of to take this seriously. I think the first thing is make it part of their strategic priorities, right? So making something part of your strategic priority means that you pay compensation around it. And so we have our company-wide bonus. Part of that, our company-wide bonus is based on diversity, how well we're doing around diversity and inclusion. And there's no way to better motivate people than how you compensate folks. I think having open and honest conversations with people as well, and having people within your organization that can go out to colleges and to their friends to be able to recruit is also really important. So there's no better recruiter than the folks in your organization. And if they can talk about your organization and their own experiences and how they're working in an inclusive environment, that their voices are heard, they're appreciated, that they have a seat at the table, that they have opportunities in the company, then you can start making a difference.
Yeah, one other thing I would just add is that we've launched a number of initiatives to kind of build a pipeline. So we're launching a program with the HBCUs to develop talent in that space. On the legal department, we're also we've got a number of initiatives to kind of build the kind of expertise that we need in our department. So we're partnering with some of our law firm providers to create kind of specialized training tracks for young lawyers and law students to develop expertise in what we know we need, what we're trying to buy. And, I think that just making, as Dominic said, making it strategic, making it treating it like any other business problem, and trying to add some kind of intellectual and analytical rigor to how we do this is very important.
Great. Thank you for that. And another question that came in through the chat is, what do you recommend as the first step for white people in white-owned and white-run businesses to begin to identify and foster productive and positive discussions around dismantling structural racism?
I love that question. I'll take a stab at it, Dom. I think the first thing, I've written a lot in terms of blogs and things like that around this issue, and I think that first, I think educating yourself as to the kind of history and understanding kind of how we got here is really critically important. It's impossible to figure out where we're going to go if you haven't understood how we got here and how we got to this moment. I think a lot about the South African model, where they did the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I think in America, we've tried to skip the truth part and go straight to reconciliation, which just won't work. It's like making up with somebody and never apologizing. It's like that, it just will never work. And so I think really understanding the truth of how America has operated, how it has treated people, and how we got here is really critically important, to have even a context to have the right conversation. And then I think, for in particular in business, I think, looking at your team, how diverse is your team? And how can you increase the diversity within your team? And then have honest conversations. I mean, one of the things I like that Dominic said is, like, we're now at the corporate level, we're having a much more authentic conversation about race. It takes some groundwork, it takes some training, it takes some understanding, it takes some patience. But we're having these conversations that literally 5 years ago were not taking place. So I think that white allies and leaders need to lean in to this, educate yourself, and not be afraid to have a discussion. And here's an easy thing: ask somebody who's different on your team how is your experience, and then be quiet and let them talk. That will go a long way.
And the only thing I couldn't agree more with you, Damon, in terms of the education piece. I think they said, what's kind of the first step? I think there's a book out there called White Fragility that would be kind of a helpful read on the outside and from the onset. And then there's additional materials that you can read as well. But besides that, I think it's about setting a goal. Just like any other business proposition, you kind of set goals, you set objectives, and have it be included within your objectives. Remember, I said make it strategic. By making it strategic, that means it's part of your normal business objectives. And so set the objective. I think if you set the objective and a clear plan on how to achieve your goal, you'll certainly get there. And so I appreciate the question, because it's like, what's the first step? That means that you're thinking through, how do I start making a difference? And by asking that question, you've already taken that first step. And now it's just kind of following through and taking the second and third step, and then setting a goal for yourself and going after it.
Sounds amazing. We really enjoy your input. We also had a few questions of our own. We actually had a similar question from the audience as well. And that is, structural racism is one large mountain to climb. Openly combating it can be exhausting, oftentimes discouraging. Yet you both have earned yourself positions of leadership and are actively combating it. So what motivates you to continue fighting for racial equity? Where did that passion originate? And, have you guys learned anything about yourselves along the way?
Yeah, that's a great question. Terrific question. I probably say there's a couple things that motivates me. I was raised by a single parent and my mother, and just watching her struggle and working extremely hard to put me in a position so I can go to Holy Cross and continue my education. That's kind of my biggest motivator. And she's always preached to me around kind of working hard to achieve your goals and making sure that you don't forget where you come from. I think that also when I was growing up, I moved from a fairly diverse town in Connecticut, Norwich, to another town called Killingley, and it was very difficult, and that was the first time I experienced not that I experienced racism, but the first time I recognized racism. And to give you an example of this, as soon as I moved, we had class systems, right? So depending on what they would think of as your intellectual abilities and your capabilities, they'll put you in a certain section. And when I came from another school, and they immediately put me in the lowest section. And in that section was all the minorities in that school, without any grading, without any test. And I rebelled against that. And it was hurting me because I was getting suspended from school just because I was angry. I didn't know why I was angry, but I also didn't understand why I was being put into classrooms where I learned those materials years and years ago. And so all of this motivated me to start doing research. And so I started doing self-research, especially in high school. I learned about all of the various leaders and their courage during the civil rights movement, and many of them giving their lives, right? So if you kind of study the civil rights movement in terms of the freedom rides, or kind of the folks who were kind of leading various marches, or the Black Panther Party, whatever it was, these folks were kind of putting their lives on the line to create opportunities for me. And so I also kind of feel obligated to continue to carry that torch and continue to open doors and create opportunities for others coming behind me. That's the only way that this works. There's so many different people that helped me along the way, including at Holy Cross, that I feel a sense of duty to help others as well.
Yeah, I mean, just to add, I think similarly, I'm a student of history. I understand what has been given up and sacrificed for me to have the opportunities that I have, and I kind of owe that. I've got pictures all around my office. I got Ali, and I got Jesse Owens, and I got Jim Brown and Kareem over here, and it's just really, really important for me to kind of honor that sacrifice. But also, I got kids, man. I got two teenagers, and I think it would be a real shame if we handed the world over to them and worse condition than we got it. The stats I read at the beginning about the lack of progress is just unacceptable. And so when I'm tired and when I'm exhausted, I find a way to give more, because I've had tremendous opportunities in my life, and that shouldn't be rare, right? People should be able to say, look, you got talent. We're going to help you develop it and cultivate it and be the best that you can be. And everywhere that I've been, I've encountered that. And so I'm just trying to do that for other people, create more openings and opportunities.
Great. Well, thank you both very much. I think that this next question actually does tie very well into that idea of including everyone. Our question is, how do you find intersectionality works where you are in your space? And do you find it hard or overwhelming to make this intersectionality work? An example of this would be knowing that Black people in your workforce are being disproportionately discriminated against, and that you expect this to happen amongst higher rates of Black women as well. And additionally, I'll add in, how do you think, or not how do you think, but how do you work with your colleagues when imposter syndrome comes into play with this as well?
Well, that's a lot in that question, but I think intersectionality is really important. I think that a lot of times, as a Black person in business or a person of color, particularly, from my Black female friends. There's times where you'll have an interaction with somebody and you don't know why it went south. And so you spend a lot of time trying to figure out essentially somebody else's problem. And so I think it's really important to be there for each other, and to be able to kind of decode that and talk through it, and kind of figure out what is my response. Is it, how do I respond to this in the best way that's going to move the conversation forward? And that might take different forms, depends on what happens. But I think it's really kind of hard to decode, like, why is it that this went poorly? And so I think it's usually a better way to think about it is like, well, how do I own this, and how do I move forward, and how do I try to change the situation going forward? Because, things happen.
It's funny. I think that, and I'm going to go back to the Holy Cross here. I think that going to Holy Cross allowed me to walk into certain situations, or many situations, and didn't feel like an imposter at all, right? So a couple things. Number one, Holy Cross is a small liberal arts institution, right? You learn how to think critically. You learn how to understand complex situations, and understand the trends, the critical information, reading, writing, and you develop this toolkit to help no matter what profession that you're in. And moreover, I was one of 63 African Americans at Holy Cross at the time. And I know that the demographics of the campus looks a lot different now, but when I was there was 63 African Americans. And so it was not unusual for me to be the only African American in class. And when you're in class, on average, what do you have, 15 people in the class on average, a little bit larger when you're a freshman, but there's no room to hide, right? You have to lean into the conversation. You need to be able to express yourself. You need to be able to articulate your argument and your position. And that helped prepare me when I went to law school. And then I developed some additional skills. And when I went out to the workforce. And so, I don't walk into a situation where I feel as though I'm an imposter, right? I've already been put in a situation where I was the only Black person in the room, and more frequently than not, I am the only Black person in the room. I think kind of going through Holy Cross and the rigors of the academics and understanding how to kind of articulate your argument and position your argument, I think that kind of carries on.
Yeah, I mean, I just add, and thanks, Tom, for bringing up the imposter syndrome, because I forgot that part. I think that, first of all, everybody is developing. I'm at the executive leadership table at my company, and everybody around that table that is like chief of something has some area that they're trying to develop and learn in. So we're all on this learning journey, and having a growth mindset is really critically important. Nobody's a finished product. Second, as Dominic said, coming through Holy Cross gave me a tremendous amount of confidence. I've never had an imposter syndrome. I've always had a good deal of confidence, but by the same token, you have to have humility. So I try to live between these two circles. And one circle is everybody is enlightened and knows something that I don't. And the other circle is I have a lot to offer. And I live right between those two circles. And that's how I approach almost every scenario.
Thank you for sharing. And as we're getting close to ending your session, we wanted to ask, how can the Holy Cross community get involved in the new Commonwealth racial equity and social?
So you cut a little bit there, Landy, but I think you were asking how the Holy Cross community can get involved with NCF. Is that right?
Yeah, sorry.
Well, I think there's certainly a few different ways. The first way, I think, we have a website, newcommonwealthfund.org, and we share on that website a lot of information about the fund. You have an opportunity, if you would like, to give. You'll also see the organizations that we have supported. And so if even if you're not in a position to give, to volunteer for those organizations, you can also make an impact. I think kind of staying plugged into our work and our activity If you're aware of an organization that's playing in our space and working on dismantling racism, making us aware of that organization so we can determine whether or not it's a match and a fit for a new Commonwealth fund will also be very, very helpful for us.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add is just, in the future, we're going to be rolling out some initiatives around kind of research and study, and there might be some opportunities for students to get involved, in the work, as summer fellowships and things like that. We're still developing some of that. That's more probably a 2022 thing, but I'd stay in touch. Keep looking out for what we've got going, and there'll be a lot of opportunities to partner with us going forward.
Thanks to both of you, Damon and Dominic, for your mentorship, the thoughtfulness you've given to that, some of the sources you've shared, including one book that I'm eager to read. It's been on my list, the one Holly McGee, is it?
Heather McGee, yeah.
Heather McGee, that one's on my list now. So, but I think for the kind of mentorship you do, for the way you help us students think about the way you position yourself in a situation, I think that's really helpful for all of us to learn about. We continue to have a lot to overcome. The statistics that Damon, you started with, and Dominic, you offered some others, are pretty hard to face after as many years. So it's a reason I think I understand why students also get impatient with what's happened already and want to push hard. So I'm grateful to you for working hard to develop, take us in a better direction, and to Holly and Matthew and Nalani for being with us today, and our whole audience. So have a good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Absolutely.
Have a great night.
Take care.
Bye.